This year, at hospitals across the nation, tens of thousands of our loved ones will be diagnosed with some form of leukemia or lymphoma, and many of them will die, hopelessly waiting for a viable donor that will never come. But what if I were to tell you that those days of waiting are over? That we are all curable? Regardless of our ethnic backgrounds, each and every single one of us is curable. And that the cure lies in our diversity. See, now we know that unrelated donors of umbilical cord blood stem cells have a higher rate of safety and efficacy than using bone marrow extracted from a blood relative. And let me repeat that. Unrelated donors of umbilical cord blood stem cells, when used, has a higher rate of safety and efficacy than using bone marrow from a blood relative. See, the first stem cell transplant was a bone marrow transplant. It occurred in 1968 at the University of Minnesota. And there are three types of bone marrow transplants. The first being the kind where they extract bone marrow from your own body to replace your diseased marrow. The second being the kind where they extract bone marrow from a twin. And the third and most successful of the three is where they extract bone marrow from a blood relative and have that commingled with that of a very closely matching stranger. Now, the inherent problems with this, or these procedures, is that, well, number one is relapse. Because as you replace the diseased cells, you're only replacing them with the same genetic predispositions that have allowed the diseased cells to flourish in the first place. Two, your body could just reject the donor's cells and you get sicker. And you have to convince someone to let you drill into their bone marrow and extract a sample. So, again, unrelated donors of umbilical cord blood stem cells having a higher rate of safety and efficacy greatly reduces, if not completely eliminates, the chances of relapse. And if we were to collect just 5% of the umbilical cord blood that is discarded on a daily basis in San Diego County alone, we would have enough to have compatible matches for each and every single patient diagnosed with every form of leukemia, lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, Hodgkin's lymphoma, and over 241 life-threatening blood-borne illnesses, to include sickle cell anemia, Krabbe disease, and severe immunodeficiency syndrome, more than 2.5 times the need of the county, 250% the number diagnosed. California is such a broad and diverse population that we should be the first state to feasibly declare in our states, in our hometown, no patient ever need go without a match. But this isn't even being discussed. It's not being done at all, because there's just no money in it. 90% of all cord blood stem cells are privately controlled and owned by private cord blood banks that are selling biological insurance, where they take your disease predisposed DNA, bank it, and sell it right back to you. And often promising cures that don't exist, like for MS or Parkinson's or nerve damage. Bone marrow produces all of the cells that float around your bloodstream. They do not produce brain cells, they do not produce nerve cells, and they do not produce anything that will fix Parkinson's or MS. And what they also do is bank your cord blood so privately that it's often done abroad because, well, you can't get the cord blood to be used in treatment here. Also, if they could use it to be treated here, we couldn't treat sickle cell because they don't exactly market to minorities. Anyway, back in 2013, we started a youth awareness group and we called ourselves Stem Cells Cure. And back then I didn't even really know what a stem cell was, but I knew that we were going to make a documentary. So we get together, we get the camera crew and everything, we're all pumped, but we're interviewing my co-founder and best friend's father, who was misdiagnosed with ALS and dying, paralyzed, of MS. And it was such a horrible state and scene that I couldn't possibly conduct that interview. But I knew that I needed to do something and needed to make a difference, make a dent. So I had to educate myself. So I started cold calling the right people from the right institutions and attended the right medical conferences to meet those right people. And before I knew it, Alan Fernandez, the associate director at the time of the Genetics Policy Institute and the co-founder of the World Stem Cell Summit, took me under his wing. And I got to attend the World Stem Cell Summit of 2013. When I was at this summit, it cost thousands to attend, and there were dozens and dozens and dozens of conferences. When I was at the Gala Awards dinner, there had to have been at least 1,000 people there. And I was sitting front and center with some politicians and the directors of the Genetics Policy Institute and the founders of the World Stem Cell Summit. And I was sitting across from Mr. Sanford and Mr. Burnham, the $100 million founders of the Sanford Consortium for Regenerative Medicine. And Mr. Sanford got up and shook my hand and actually told me that I'm the future of stem cell. And we were just an awareness group. We didn't know, I didn't know what to say when people would ask me, what am I doing there? I'm running an awareness group. But the next day is when I found my calling. See, I attended 2 conferences on that following day. The first one being on biological insurance and private cord blood banking. And it was chocked full of hundreds of people, but not of researchers, scientists, or even doctors or concerned citizens. Rather, lobbyists, businessmen, investors, and attorneys. So when I went to the next conference, which was also on umbilical cord blood, it was focused on the actual developments and therapies. The conference where we learned that unrelated donors of umbilical cord blood stem cells are more effective than bone marrow from a blood relative was empty. We practically outnumbered the speakers. The other way around, the speakers outnumbered the audience. There was less than 20 people in that audience, and I was one of less than 4 that wasn't checking my Twitter or something on my phone. I was disgusted. But I know that there's hope because there is already a public blood bank for cord blood in New York. Now, I said earlier that there's just no money in it, and there isn't, but there is. See, if we mainstream public banking, then we mainstream the procedures that are used. If we mainstream the procedures that are used, then we mainstream the medications that are used. If we mainstream the medications that are used, then we revolutionize the pharmaceutical industry's role in regenerative medicine. See, by focusing on the companies that have refined the safety and efficacy of their medications, they'll make a killing. Every stem cell transplant in this country requires the use of chemotherapy to kill the diseased cells and make way for the new healthy stem cells to flourish. When focusing on the companies that have refined the safety and efficacy of their chemotherapy medications, we will be revolutionizing the way they do business and revolutionizing the way we handle philanthropy. Because when we get them to sponsor our initiative, which will be at first the great race between Texas and California to see who will be the first state to feasibly declare in our state, in our hometowns, no patient ever need go without a match. But once this campaign is sponsored and there is mainstream banking, this campaign goes from being an awareness initiative to a sponsorship initiative. Now, in San Diego County, there are about 935 cases diagnosed a year. If we were to pay out of pocket for each of them at $40,000 on average per procedure, we're looking at roughly $36 million to pay out of pocket for each and every patient in San Diego County. Now, how are we going to do this? That's how much we pay as a society the best of our ball players and entertainers. But how are we going to use donations and sponsorship funds to accurately, transparently, credibly, and adequately sponsor patients in need of treatment they could otherwise not afford? Well, a few years ago I was in treatment for PTSD. And I was introduced to the 12 steps. Now, it doesn't matter whether you have gone to the VA or a celebrity treatment center for deep depression, trauma, or bulimia or alcoholism, or whether you go to the Hole in the Wall in county for an opiate addiction. They will send you all to the same 12 steps. And that is because the therapeutic value of one helping another of the same or similar plight is without parallel. Without parallel. And those symptoms of spiritual malady and emotional bankruptcy that develop with deep depression and trauma also develop when you're suffering in silence by your loved one's bedside, having to choose whether to be there or go to work to afford their treatment, or watching your 6-year-old daughter gracefully accept her own mortality, or if you as a patient have to accept the fact that a viable donor may never come and that you're probably going to die. When I was at these 12-step meetings, I learned something. I learned that a fellowship and community grew about these people. It became their entire social lives. And that there was meaning and sanctity in giving of yourself so that others may live better. So we rewrote those 12 steps and created the first tax advantageous service-based support group to make your social life tax deductible. But it's a support group that's for anyone and everyone affected by a life-threatening illness. Now, as these new friendships and relationships develop, so too does information. And these groups become the most credible way of identifying patients in need of sponsorship they could otherwise not afford. And I don't mean having these groups autonomously starting GoFundMe accounts. I mean having the establishment of a fund that has but one primary purpose, okay? To sponsor patients for treatments they could otherwise not afford. Let's revolutionize the way we as a species ensure our survival by redefining philanthropy and redefining society as community and humanity as family, because diversity is our cure.